everyone who's joining us live for what I've called Title Talk. This is going to be a discussion about everything title, especially when specifically if you're looking to purchase or sell a home. And to help me with this title talk, I have Lisa Rosmarnovich, which I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
Great, yeah. And so she is the Director of Sales and Marketing at Capital Title. She is a licensed industry professional with over 24 years in and around the real estate industry with licenses in title and real estate, as well as experience as a mortgage loan officer. Her 35 plus years in sales and marketing have given her the ability to provide top-notch customer service, as well as use her background knowledge to troubleshoot some of the most challenging scenarios. So thank you, Lisa, for being here. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So the first basic question is, what does a title company do?
So a title company, the main thing we do is we issue title insurance policies. And that entails doing a real deep, all-encompassing search on properties. And we go very deep. We go back about 40 years. And we're just looking, we look for, chain of title to make sure that there's what we call no break in the chain of title, that, seller B was transferring to buyer A transferred to buyer B, and that there isn't any skips in that chain. We also look for liens that are on the property, whether it be mortgages or, we get, child support can be a lien on the property, federal tax liens, state tax liens, parking tickets can even be a lien on your property. So we do a really deep search on that. And then we come up with a plan to make sure everything gets released or paid off so that the new homeowner is not responsible for any of those liens or obligations from that owner that's selling to them. And then we issue an owner's policy, which ensures that they are protected from anything of past owners.
Okay. And so you said to go back 40 years. There's a specific, anything special by why 40 years is the timeline?
That's a good question. I just know it's an industry standard is that we go back 40 years, and we don't just search the property, we're also searching names, because sometimes depending on who's filing some sort of a lien, sometimes it's filed against their name and not against the property per se. Thinking of federal and state tax liens, that's of course against the name. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure why it's 40 years, but that's what everyone does.
Okay. And what are the different types of deeds, and why should most people look to get a warranty deed when purchasing a home?
Well, if you allow me to, I'm going to just share my screen really quickly.
Okay.
And I'm going to just pull up a graphic that shows some real estate deeds. And the first one is the general warranty deed. That gives you the most protection because it obligates the person that's transferring to, the seller transferring to the new owner. It guarantees that they're going to be free of any claims coming from a third party because of them. And then there's a special warranty deed. Sometimes you'll hear it called a covenant deed. Sometimes it's called a fiduciary deed. And that just means that the person selling the property is not living in it, so they don't have a lot of knowledge about what has gone on in the home. So it only warrants from the time that they've had the home in their ownership. Think of bank-owned homes. The bank would issue a special warranty deed instead of a general warranty deed because they don't really know the property history. And then a quitclaim deed is giving no guarantees at all. I mean, it's saying that I'm transferring to you any type of interest I have in the property, and generally there is no, type of interest. Usually you don't see those in transactions unless we're trying to correct an issue, like maybe there was a break in the chain of title and maybe it was a husband and wife who owned and they got divorced and the wife kept the home and the husband never got deeded off the property. We would go to that person and ask them to sign a quitclaim deed to deed off their interests. But yeah, we generally don't want to see any quitclaim deeds in the chain of title.
Yeah, and so going a little bit further into the quitclaim deed, um, let's say someone does buy on a quitclaim deed and then they go in and try to sell the property afterwards. Do you see a lot of times that they will need to go through quiet title a lot more because of the issue of the quitclaim, or do you think that's more specific?
No, not really. I mean, we would just do a search and make sure that that person who, actually executed that quitclaim deed actually had ownership interest in the home. I mean, I could create a quitclaim deed and put, deed myself onto your home and it's just not valid. But the nice thing too is that the municipalities kind of take a look before they record things too, and they may question things. I don't know if you've ever gone to the counter of the Register of Deeds. They'll take a look at it. They'll say, oh, this isn't right, or they'll question things. So there's usually kind of a second set of eyes too.
Okay. And can you explain what pre-title is and difference of when a title company performs pre-title versus if they do not?
Yeah, pre-title is just ordering, and typically a real estate agent, when they get a listing, will order title work before they get an offer on a home. General practice is to order title once you get a purchase contract, because then we know, who the parties are involved. But one of the benefits of ordering pre-title is that, especially if you think that there might be some issues, maybe there's some liens that you're questioning, or maybe somebody went through a bankruptcy and there's things that we need to take a look at that might take some time to get clear to close. So we take, pre-title orders all the time. We don't mind. And most of the time those deals do close. So it's not really a hardship on us. But I think it just makes the realtor, the homeowner, everybody breathe a little bit more, deeply and not be stressed out because at the last minute we're trying to get things cleared because we waited to order title work.
Yeah, I've definitely had one where I actually never listed the property because when I sent it to get pre-title and they were still working on the house before they're going to be ready, they were actually the ones where they quitclaim deeded from they bought it from someone that they knew or trusted originally, and they could never find title company could never figure out who the mortgage company was, because that mortgage company actually closed. There were all kind of issues, and they ended up needing to go through quiet title in order to actually get it out, and they never sold the house.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Just so people know too, what quiet title is if that generally happens on properties that were purchased at a tax sale, like a tax foreclosure sale. So the reason why we required quiet title, which usually involves, hiring an attorney, is that you have to make sure that anybody who had an interest in that property before the tax sale was notified that it was going to tax sale, so that they had an opportunity to, be current on the taxes or to, try to work out some situation. So it involves, getting a hold of people who may have an interest in the property, making sure that they received letters and things like that. But quiet title isn't, necessary on most transactions. So
Yeah, okay. Thank you for explaining quiet title as well. I should have asked that question to you too. So why is it best for sellers and buyers to have separate title representation instead of using the same title company unless it's a cash deal?
Well, this is kind of controversial because a lot of agents don't like, they like to just use one title company. And there's been probably in the last 15 years, there's been a rise on what we call split closings, where there's one title company that represents the seller and one title company that represents the buyer if there's a mortgage. And because when there's a mortgage on a transaction, there's going to be two different policies that are issued. So each title company would be responsible for issuing those particular policies. So I think personally, I think it's good to have a second set of eyes, somebody that's representing your customer if you're the buyer's agent. And because they're we each do our own searches, and maybe one title company didn't search names and they just searched the property address, or maybe it's a new construction and a title company has a relationship with a building company, and so they don't ask for particular documents because they have a relationship with them and they know who they are, but they still need to be in the file, so to speak. I just think it's good practice for protecting your client, especially in days that we are in, like right now, where there's a lot of seller impersonations on vacant home or vacant property, or homes that are, like snowbirds. So they're vacant for 6 months while someone's in Florida. And so you want a company who is going to be making sure that your buyer's money is protected in a transaction too.
Yeah, when I first got started, the person that was mentoring me said that, if the listing agent wants you to use their title company, you shouldn't be worried about it because, everything's regulated. And I said, oh, okay, well, and they said, it's going to be easier. It's like, yeah, I guess it could be easier than not communicating with everybody, this and that. And so I did that, but and sometimes it wasn't bad, right? It's not always the case, especially if it's cash, that's what you have to do. But I did have a few instances where, it just led me to say, if I can help it, we're definitely never doing that ever again. Because one of them, when it came down to close, even though the listing agent was in favor of the issue that we had, where there was something important missing out of the house, at the closing, she didn't want to go ahead and get what needed to be signed to protect the buyer, just really giving a hard time unnecessarily. And I think it's because he did a lot of deals with that seller before. Even though the seller was fine with everything, she assumed that we were just, trying to finagle something there, I guess. But it all worked out. But that was one instance. And then I had another instance where it was just a bunch of issues. What was written on the purchase agreement, they were actually just referencing whatever the listing agent said, even though the purchase agreement had everything, all the information needed there. So I had to argue a lot about that. When it came down to actually closing and the listing agent trying to switch, what people need to get paid and what was owed, my closing package was actually held up at the closing. I had to specifically wait and ask for it, otherwise I was going to receive it. And then later on, after the closing, they actually didn't pay the taxes appropriately. They did pay them, but they did it all in one lump sum instead of separating them. So the buyer got something in the mail saying that, needed her to pay these taxes. So, yeah, if I can help it, I will not ever do that.
Yeah. And we are a regulated industry, but we're regulated in terms of all of our rates are pretty much the same because each title underwriter has to file their rates with the state. So generally, title insurance policies are going to be the same because you can't discount title because they're filed with the state. Yeah. And it's nice to work with people that you know, people that you trust too. And who can, you know, pull a favor for you when you say this has got to close tomorrow or the rate lock's going to expire. When you have a relationship with the title company, it makes it a lot easier to understand because they know that you don't come to us all the time and say, this has got to close tomorrow because of a rate lock, you know? So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's another thing too, is just also getting information on certain things. If I went to someone else, they wouldn't provide because, something I may ask for would actually cost money to my seller, but maybe I can get it, figured out because we've already been doing a lot of business together. But yeah, I mean, even something simple where the seller, I had the buyer, but the seller switched title companies at the very last minute and it was clear why, because the new title company didn't do their homework. And fortunately, at the time, Capital Title still knew what the problem needed to resolve was. And if they never asked about it, we would have closed. And there would have been this lien still on the property that was actually almost the same amount of price as what they were selling the house for.
oh,
So,
wow. Yeah,
yeah.
that's gets scary. And another thing too, I mean, you want to make sure that the title company that's representing your client is well established, that they have business practices that protect you and your client, like encrypted email, and they can check for identity fraud with programs like we have a program called Closing Lock, and we have people, you know, verify their identity through this program, and it will let us know whether or not we should proceed. So I don't know a lot of title companies that are doing that, but this we've had some close calls before we started using this, where there was a seller that was a fake seller selling a piece of property that wasn't his, and we got to the closing table and found out that it wasn't their property. So it could have been a huge loss for the buyer. So we now have even more protections. So that's another really important reason.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I mean, with these kind of issues that go on, and let's say they actually do close, or there's something that they can't come back from, right? Since you never want to go, the buyer or the seller want to go back to the title company and say, "Hey, you made a huge error. What are you gonna do about it?" I mean, I'm assuming that they would need to cover it, but what if they are a small title company and they just, the seller or the buyer ends up suing the title company and they don't have the funds. I mean, how does that really get worked out?
Well, it would be a lawsuit, I'm sure. So yeah.
Okay. And you did talk about chain of title a little bit, which essentially is going back and seeing, who currently owns the property and who has owned in the past and how did that get transferred. But I guess how do you exactly verify chain of title?
We do that by digging deep into public records, and we pull every deed in the chain of title back those 40 years. So we have examiners that once that information is pulled for the examiner, they go through each and make sure that you know, the transfer was correct each time. So that's basically how we verify it.
Okay. Um, what are different ways sellers and buyers can close if they're able to close at the title company or a real estate office? How does title company make sure that things happen?
Yeah, we're very flexible. I think the whole COVID thing taught us a lot about other avenues that can happen for closings. But we can close in a title company office, in a real estate office. We've closed in banks before. Um, you know, we've had situations where, you know, people are in a senior home and we've been able to send a notary there for them to close. Also, we have what's called remote online notary, where you can do everything online, which is pretty cool. As a seller, it works best for sellers, because for buyers, if they have a mortgage or cash sale, but if the buyer has a mortgage, there's some lenders that won't allow an electronically signed mortgage. And some municipalities don't like to record electronically signed documents as well. So we just have to, every transaction's unique, so you just check to make sure if your deal would qualify for that. And then there's these hybrid type closings where you can DocuSign documents that don't need a notarization on them, a notarization signature, and then come in to the office, to the title office or real estate office to meet with a notary and just sign those few documents that require notarization. So there's a lot of different ways we can do things.
So, I had a follow-up question to that. If, and I think I may have lost my train of thought.
Was it maybe if you have a seller that's out of state, maybe? Where we've done what they call seller sendaways, where we actually will overnight documents to a seller and they make arrangements, or we make arrangements with a notary in their area to get their documents signed, and then they overnight them back to make sure they get here for the person who's going to be closing in person. So that's another thing that we can do as well.
Yeah, I've had that before too. Oh, here it is. So, we were talking about mortgage companies. So is it still the case that there's about 4 documents that anybody, whether if they have a mortgage quote and they sign a lot electronically, they still have to do those by hand? Or is that specific to lender where they could actually sign all of them electronically if they wanted to, depending on the lender?
Depending on the lender, they could all sign them electronically in front of a notary online. So there would still be a notary involved, but it's an online notarization signature. And it's very, we go through a lot of verifications where they have to show their driver's license. There's all types of safeguards. But yes, if the lender would allow all of their documents to be notarized online with a remote online notary, then yes, we could do that.
Yeah, okay. It's good to know. How do title companies rely on realtors and brokers to help buyers and sellers ensure a smooth transaction overall?
How do we rely on them?
Yeah, I guess more so, because a lot of times you're not really talking to the buyer or the.
Oh, right. Yeah, it just depends. I mean, we've got realtors that ask us not to contact their customer. They want to be that only person that contacts them, which is fine. Then we've got realtors who are like, oh, you can call my customer, please do. So, but generally we rely on you guys to help communicate with your customer. We have no problem communicating with the buyer or the seller, but it just depends on how comfortable the realtor is in wanting us to speak to them one-on-one. And kind of helping them, remind them, like, once they get their instructions for closing and what to bring to closing, maybe just following up with them and like, hey, remember, we need, your ID, make sure your check is a, certified check made out to the title company, things like that. And then there are situations where there is what we call a cloud on title, where we're going to need information from the seller in order to get that cleared away so that does not become an issue. And so we might ask the realtor who's working with the seller to try to help make sure we get that documentation that we need, whether it be an original death certificate that's brought to closing, or I'm trying to think of some other things, but yeah, generally things that we need to clear off title in order to close.
Yeah, because I think, I think probably rarely have, I think sometimes I've had a seller or buyer call the title company directly. Well, I always come do that when if they're gonna wire, right?
Right.
Make sure that you're going to the right place for you to send the money off.
Right.
But a lot of times these, it's still good. They may get the emails about the wiring instruction, things like that. But I know how hard it can be sometimes with the lender getting what they need from the buyer. Even I have a transaction coordinator, and she'll follow up. But a lot of times it takes that extra person to, in my experience, to check in with certain people on where they are with things, because not everyone checks their emails and everybody answers phone calls that they don't recognize the number for. They might take my phone call, they didn't recognize the phone number that I've called them on. So
Right.
I think it just helps if everyone works together, even though there may be overlap in job roles, right? But you want to
Yeah.
close.
Right. Yeah, things like, making sure key exchange forms get signed, things like that. We generally need the help of the broker or the realtor to make sure that happens as well, because they're usually picking up keys from the broker's office, right? So,
Yeah. Okay. And w- I think, oh no. So when there's a lender involved in the transaction, how does the title company protect the buyer and the lender? For example, if the state capital title represents the buyer, it'd be good to ensure that the seller's title company has the same title search results. So
right. Yeah,
what,
we touched on that a little bit, but the lender, if there's a lender involved, the second policy, so there's an owner's policy that protects the new owner, the buyer, and then there's a lender policy that protects the lender. So the lender, the house that the buyer is purchasing is collateral for their mortgage. So the lender wants to make sure there's not going to be any lien in front of them. So they're particularly interested in making sure that any liens from the prior owner or any owners prior to that that didn't get cleared off are cleared off, so that, let's say, if the house burns down, the lender wants to make sure they get their money first. So that's important. And we make sure that, if this is what we're called a split title and there's another title company working on behalf of the seller, we make sure that our title commitments match. We make sure that, what we're showing as some type of lien or cloud that needs to be dealt with, paid off, released, that they have the same information. So that will really protect the buyer and the lender as well.
right, because essentially it's two title policies, right? It's the mortgage policy and then the
Right.
property policy.
Yeah. And they're different because the owner's policy is based on the sale of the home. And so if there were ever a claim on that policy, you're uh, insured up to that purchase price. And for the lender policy, it's just the amount of the mortgage. So of course, it's generally different price unless you have 100% loan to value, 100% loan. So that's one of the differences as well with the lender policy versus the owner policy.
Yeah, and so I noticed, a lot of times now, and I'm guessing in the past maybe they did come to the closing, but a lot of times now the lender does not come to the closing, depending on who the loan originator doesn't come to closing, but sometimes they do. Um, how does the title company feel, right? Because I'm thinking it depends on the case, right? Because if the lender is going to be heavily involved when they're not necessarily need to be at the closing, versus if you have an issue that comes up, because they're pretty much helping them sign the lender's documents, which usually take more of the time than the property documents. We think it'd be beneficial that they're actually there. That way, if there is an issue, it can get handled a lot faster than calling and waiting.
Yeah, or making sure they're in the same time zone. I'm a big proponent of go local, because we've had situations where, there's still some lenders that want you to fax over documents before they fund the loan, which means no money changes hands until the money's, wired over to us or they release the money. And, if you have a 4 o'clock closing on a Friday afternoon, and it goes, late, or you have a 9 a.m. closing on a Monday morning and it's a California lender and it's 6 a.m. there, it's just difficult. I think, going local and going with a lender that and maybe the lender that's even affiliated with your real estate company is a great way to go.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because I've had some where we're just waiting for the lender to fix things and they're not there. Well, no one's representing the lender. And so the closing takes a whole nother hour.
Yeah. Well, even if the lender was there, the loan officer, they'd still have to call the office to get documents changed and, so.
Yeah, but I just feel like if sometimes if they are there, they're not distracting, right? The closer. At least it's one less phone call you have to make because the
True.
person is
They could handle it there from their cell phone.
okay. And so oh, you did talk a little bit about cloud on title, but anything you want to elaborate on what it means to have a cloud on title?
Yeah, a cloud could be, you know, a break in the chain of title, because we've talked quite a bit about the chain of title. It could be any lien. Let's say, you had a new roof put on and you had the uh, roofing company finance it for you. That's what we call a UCC statement that you'll see. It's kind of a commercial type of a loan. Um, an unpaid contractor where maybe you didn't make your payment. Like I said, we talked about child support is a lien. Anything that could could be collected by from the homeowner. So it's just not a clear title. Because, a really clear deal is where you have a Mr. and Mrs. Seller who are selling to Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, and the only thing we need to worry about is paying off that mortgage for Mr. and Mrs. Seller. I mean, that would be considered a cloud on title, but we know what to do with it. We know that at closing, the buyer's funds are going to be able to pay off that mortgage, and then we release that mortgage after it's paid off. So,
Yeah, I love to see those. Um, and so why is it better for homeowners to have an Eagle title policy or an expanded policy instead of a standard title policy?
I think in this day and age, with as much fraud as going on, I think an expanded policy is the way to go. And we talked a little bit about how we do a title search from the date of, whenever we get the order, and then we search again just before closing, so it's the date of closing back 40 years. So a typical standard policy ensures the new owner from the date of closing back 40 years. So there's no post-policy coverage. So this expanded policy, one of the things that it does do is it gives you post-policy coverages, which is very rare. And that post-policy coverage has to do with forgery. So if somebody's tried to impersonate you and try to sell your house out from under you, there's coverage for that. So that's one of the really big reasons why I would push that. That policy is a little bit more. It's about 8 to 10% more in price, but it's really worth it. And if the seller doesn't want to pay that additional fee, the buyer can pay the difference. So, they could pay extra $100 or extra $200 to have that coverage. But some of the other things that it covers, I was just going to read a few things on here if I can find my piece of paper here.
Yeah.
It covers post-policy encroachment. So let's say you went away on vacation for 2 weeks and you come back and your neighbor has put a garage up and you notice that one wall looks to be on your property. So, I mean, that's a big deal. So you would call up your title insurer, like the underwriter, and say, hey, my neighbor just put up this garage and I'm pretty sure he encroached on my property. Well, what a title policy will do is it's going to make you whole. It's going to make sure that you are not being cheated out of your investment. So this title insurer will have an attorney. They actually step in your shoes. So you don't, once you make the phone call, they take care of everything. They'll either have them remove that garage wall, or they'll have them purchase that sliver of land that it's encroaching on and pay you for that. So that's a kind of a cool coverage. There's also, I have this, I'd like to read. This was an actual letter that came to one of our underwriters. It said, we purchased our home a year ago and we just love it. Then we received a shocking letter from the municipality telling us our deck, the roof over the deck, and our beautifully finished basement, all of which came with the house, was constructed without building permits.
Oh,
The municipalities, 7 years later, were demanding the building permits be obtained, that our deck, including the roof on that deck, had to be completely removed. OMG. We had to come up with over 400,000 to comply, or they'd put a lien on our home.
wow.
So this expanded policy does have coverage for that. Now, there's going to be a deductible for that, but it will handle that situation. So, oh my gosh, can you imagine? And it was 7 years later. So there are some municipalities that are pretty strict on that. I think Canton is one of those municipalities. But yeah, building permits are a huge thing when there's major type of construction. You wouldn't think a deck is major construction, but apparently it was.
Yeah,
So that's the first time I've heard about decks.
I don't know if I missed it, but how did they, how did the city come to the conclusion that, I mean, they just were researching, or did they just come across it, or someone said something?
I don't know if they just recently came across it. Maybe they were behind on, you know, the transfers, and they looked at the listing photos that were once online that were probably still online. Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe the person next door was having work done, or maybe they were gonna put a deck on and they pulled a permit. The guy came out to inspect it and is like, I don't remember inspecting that deck. Could have been something like that too.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah, it also covers, we talked a little bit about encroachment of boundary walls, fences, structural damage caused by mineral extraction or easement used by others. So it has coverage for that. There are there's 33 coverages on an expanded policy and 10 on a standard policy. So it's the difference between 10 and 33. And for, 8 to 10% more, I think it's well worth it.
yeah, I mean, well, going back to that one scenario, I mean, they wouldn't be able to sell the house either.
Right, because yeah, absolutely.
And I
Especially if the municipality, because we call municipalities to make sure that there's no um, uh, delinquency on taxes, no special assessments. So if that would come up in the record when we would call, then yeah, it would be a problem.
yeah, so that is really important to have. And I mean, I think you didn't mention though, but you can't do it on vacant land or new construction, right?
Exactly, yeah. My daughter and her husband just bought a house that was renovated totally. Like, it was a very old home that looks like a new home, especially on the inside. I did a FOIA request before I let them close and I asked for every single permit, and I made sure that they had all the permits pulled and that they had final approvals on those, because, working in the industry, that. So yeah, it can be a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, hearing that story definitely is. And yeah, I mean, that's what I've been doing most of the time because it is a seller's market. And, if I'm going to cross off and put that they're getting Eagle Tire policy, the average realtor, even if they don't read the whole purchase agreement like they should, I've now made it known that I've put something else in there.
Yeah,
And if they're not familiar with it, they don't really understand all that.
yeah,
See, for properties that have been on the market for a while, I can do that. So a lot of times I'll tell the buyer that I'm working with, I'll give them information so they know what they're getting with the extra coverage. We already know how much it probably may be for a difference. And I mean, it's for the lifetime of the property. And
yeah,
so that's well worth it for the lifetime to pay another $100, $200, or depending how much your coverage is. But the seller still pays the standard and you just pay for the upgrade.
Right.
Usually once we get, we're in the inspection period and we're asking for maybe concessions or things like that, I'll go ahead and add that in there at that time, and that way it's enough time to still get that done during the process. So, but
Yeah,
I mean, they don't
and
want it.
some brokers too have it hard coded into their purchase contracts too, so it doesn't raise a red flag. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good thing too, because if they don't, that's the thing. If it's not highlighted and they
right,
don't really read it, they don't even know what they're going into. They're just going ahead and moving forward with
yeah.
it.
And you know what? There are some title companies. So let's say that you have the buyer and the listing title company um, may require your buyer to get a survey. Because on the purchase contract, it states if the title company requires a survey, the buyer will pay for it. So one way to get around that is to get an Eagle owner's policy because they do not require a survey for I'm calling it an Eagle, but it's an expanded policy. Eagle's just one brand name of it.
Oh, okay.
They don't require a survey. And so some surveys, they start at $350. I mean, they could go all the way up to $1,000, $1,200. It would be cheaper for the buyer to pay the difference in those two policies than to pay for a survey. So it's something
And
to think about.
so, with that, if the title company says they have to get a survey, are they able to just switch to as well to a new policy, or
Yeah,
once you get
you could
survey?
just say, well, then we'd like to upgrade to an expanded policy and the buyer will pay the difference. I had that scenario where I had an agent call me about that and the upgrade was going to be $100. I'm like, it's way cheaper for your buyer to pay the $100 in the difference in the policy amount than to get a survey. And then, if there's happens to be an old survey on file that the seller had, we can use that. But it's just that if there's no survey, as long as no other work, no other, buildings have been erected on the property, then yeah, we can use an old survey.
Okay. And you did talk a little bit about how you overcome, well, preventing fraudulent transactions, but can you talk a little bit more about how title companies protect sellers and buyers from having fraudulent transactions?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is going to be about know your client. I mean, I see it every day because I hear agents in offices where they say, "Yeah, I got this message from WhatsApp. What's that? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
WhatsApp?" And the guy's out of country, but he wants to sell his property. He won't give me his phone number, only his email. So if there's people who are eluding you in some way where they don't want to talk to you, even to try to even get a Zoom call with somebody who's out of state, you really need to know your customer because it really makes you liable as well if you don't know who your client is. So though that type of scenario is very easy for us because we would just send them the closing lock link where they, upload their driver's license and answer some questions that only that person is going to know. So it's a really great way to protect the buyer, protects, yeah, their money for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. I probably at least once a month get a lead inquiry that says that they're out of state or mostly out of the country.
Yeah.
They want to buy a house, and there used to be a script that I would get several, like I'm looking to spend 1.5 million. I want to pull this and that. And I did get one that met with me on Zoom, but they wouldn't show their face, right? And they would
Oh.
lead me to getting into crypto, right? They want to say they can buy the house with crypto and all that. But almost always now, if I get a lead and say they want me to go on WhatsApp, I'm almost certain that it's a scam. But you never know. So I always still reach
Right,
out and see how it goes. But I already have my, lights on, but I mean my mind, right, to consider it
right.
probably a scam. But for the system that you're using, do you is that just when something is suspicious, do that, or is it almost always whenever they're closing remotely or
When it's certain transactions that involve vacant land, out of state, things that are suspicious. And, a lot of times it might even be the agent that says, I think we should run this through. But yeah, not on every transaction. Just on the ones that are where there's no seller visible, right? I was going to say something else about closing. Oh, we also will, if there's like an out-of-state seller, which is fine, there's out-of-state sellers, right? I mean, there are real sellers that are out of state. But we will no longer allow a seller to hire their own notary, because we had a situation where they somebody impersonated a notary that was a real notary and has really messed up that person's life because they used her name and everything to notarize fraudulent documents. So, we will make sure that we set up notaries, and this protects everybody. So we just want to make sure that, people are getting what they expect that they're getting.
Yeah. Oh, so basically it was a real notary and he just made it seem like it was her and she was never there. Wow.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to how title companies ensure clear title for buyers?
Yeah, I mean, by just doing our search, have our search documents examined by one of our examiners, and making sure that at closing, the things that we required to be paid off and discharged all take place.
And well, I don't know if there's anything else to say that, well, I mean, I guess if you had to pick your top ways, your top five things that title companies do to ensure a smooth transaction, what would you say they are?
Communication with the realtor, making sure that, we have everything up front. And, there are times where we may need additional information, and knowing how, working with clients on a regular basis, you get to know their communication style. Like, does Patrice like to be text, or would she rather have a phone call, or does she like email? And then making sure that, we are, have everything we need to close and we're not scrambling at the last minute. And I think that makes happy customers all the way around.
Yeah, communication is always big for me. I'm even the kind of person, I guess I like over communication, so I may text someone something or email someone something that doesn't require a response, but I'm looking for them to say, acknowledge some kind of way that they received the message.
Yeah. And I think too, doing, making sure we all want to get to the closing table, right? Because that's where everything happens. That's where, the seller gets his money, the buyer gets his house, the title company gets their money for the title policy, agents get their commissions. We want to make sure that happens as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible. And doing pre-title, when we talked about that in the beginning, that's one of the ways that we make sure where there's not any surprises at the end. So we don't like surprises at the end. Nobody does.
Yeah, I mean, I do pre-title for every single deal, no matter what,
Yeah.
because I never know what's needed and how long it will take to get it. And like I said earlier, I had one that never listed because of what came up.
Right.
And years ago, I had one where when I first started, I was involved in the transaction, but I wasn't the realtor per se. But basically 9 months had gone by and they still hadn't cleared the title. And they actually had a buyer in place. So they could have easily lost that buyer because they're going through title. And then if the market's changed, the price may be different, you're back on the market. It's a whole factor when it's better to know up front than wait till you have a buyer.
Right.
And so we're just about done here. So last question I have right now is, why should sellers and buyers consider using a title company for all real estate transactions, including transactions where an attorney is involved?
Well, generally, attorneys will want a title search done. And hopefully they would want the buyer to have a policy, an owner's policy. So we just want to make sure that we have that information that we would send to the attorney so that he could review what's on title. And I don't think that it's wise for a buyer to buy any property without having a title search on it. Because number one, you want to verify who the person is, who you're buying from. You want to make sure that they have all the rights in order to sell it. And you want to make sure that there's nothing that's on the property or within the property boundaries that are going to inhibit you from doing what you want with the property. Like there might be an easement at the back of the property and you want to build a garage back there, or a pole barn or a shed, or put a pool in, but yet there's electrical wires underground in the back of your property and now you can't do that. That's what a title search will bring all that up. It'll anything that's recorded, we'll be able to see that. And it gives you the most information you can about the property, other than the address and how much taxes are, you know?
Yeah. And so is there anything else you want to add?
No, other than you've been a great client and we really appreciate working with you.
Yeah, I appreciate working with you guys as well. It's been great so far, and I look forward to the future. And anyone that's looking to work with Capital Title, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Well, they can reach out. We have a basic info@capitaltitle.net. And if they're working, that way we know like what area you're in. We have like 9 branch offices across the state. And so we would know which branch that we would transfer you to. But yeah, we'd love to work with anybody. So.
Okay.
And
Well,
we
thank
also, I just want to mention too, I'm sorry, we have new construction. We do new construction. We do commercial, anything, that you can sell real estate wise, we insure. And we have multiple attorneys on staff and very well versed in title. We've been in business, next year will be 50 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, been around a long time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been great and very informative. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Bye. If you've enjoyed watching this video and would love to stay up to date when I have more content like this or something similar that you may be interested in, please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell so you get notifications. And I hope you have a great day.